A headline in one of the newspapers was $6 billion in illegal spending. Mr. Fry, I can't find that figure. What's your range guesstimate? $6 billion, but I see $6 to $10 billion. Which are you suggesting?
Well, first of all, I never intended that document to be sent to the press. I intended for the Secretary, when I sent it to him 7 weeks ago, my intent was to do what he asked us to do, which was to give him information that he might be able to act upon. Those ranges are there because we know we spend $5 billion a year in fee-basis care. And that's where you walk to, a veteran like myself walks into a VA hospital, for instance. So
on the figure, I want to follow up on the Secretary issue, but it's 6, is that the bottom end? Is it 6 to 10 billion? Is that where that figure comes from?
Without a proper investigation, we'll never know. But
no, I understand.
I'm confident that's at least $5 billion.
Okay, I appreciate that. The
That's
second question would be, you sent this letter to Secretary McDonald. What was the response from his office?
I have not received a response from his office.
Allegations of up to $6 billion in legal spending, and you've had no response from the Secretary's office?
I have not had any response from the Secretary's office. I know that he received it because his assistant assured me that both he and Deputy Secretary Gibson had received hard copies.
I appreciate that. Of course, Mr. Chairman, I don't know who was called in as witness, but I think that's devastating that these type of allegations and no response. Perhaps Mr. Murray is here to respond to that. But I want to ask Mr. Murray about another issue. In Mr. Fry's letter to the Secretary, when did you read that letter?
I have not seen that letter.
You're here to discuss this morning. When were you aware of the letter?
I just found out about this letter this morning.
How did you find out about it?
Through discussions with people here.
I guess I'm dumbfounded. You're here to speak for the VA about allegations of $6 billion in illegal spending, and you've never seen the allegations? Let me ask you about a meeting on July 11, 2014. According to Mr. Fry, you were at a meeting discussing many of these issues. Do you recall this meeting? Were you actually present there?
If this was a senior assessment team meeting, I was.
Okay. Did you keep notes of this meeting?
I do.
Will you provide those notes to the committee?
I absolutely will.
Okay.
Along with our request to Mr. Fry to provide the information he alleged he had from the director.
Actually, sir, I make the request, not you.
Okay.
And but I would like to see those notes. Mr. Fry alleges that it was proposed by top-level officials that violations of the law would continue. Tell me what you heard at that particular meeting and were you aware of Mr. Fry's concerns?
So Mr. Fry raised those concerns with the CFOs at the senior assessment team meeting. The particular item that was being reviewed at the time he raised those concerns was the medical necessity documentation that a physician or a clinician would provide to authorize care. It was not a contracting issue, but he raised the issue of contracting, to wit we said, let's get a team together, let's review these allegations, let's see the data that you have on this particular issue.
Did he say he thought the VHA was violating the law at this meeting?
I'm sure he did.
Well, I don't know. You were there. I was not. Mr. Fry was there. Did he say that?
I believe he probably, yes, I would say he did.
Well, we'll find out in the notes where you referenced that. Did you do anything with that information? And now you're in a position to do something with it, I guess, for 5 weeks now.
We did. Based on that meeting, we put together a work group to review these allegations. There were serious allegations. The work group did meet with VHA. Jan Fry did not attend. So the idea was to get to the bottom, to get the data that apparently that would either substantiate or refute these allegations.
Okay, I hope you could provide that to the committee. And last question would be, I guess, for you, Mr. Murray. I'm about out of time for the first round. How many active purchase cards are available to VA employees?
I believe the number is about 25,000 cards.
25,000 cards?
Yeah.
How many employees are authorized to use 25,000 cards? Is that the same number, or is it different?
No, fewer employees have cards. So Total cards is 25,500 roughly.
I'd like documentation of that, but how many employees?
I have
Are using these?
23,000 cardholders, 23,000 cardholders, 25,515. I mean, the number's ballpark, but cards. So
And are you able to indicate how many dollars of annual purchases are on these 25,000 active cards?
$3.74 billion in spend, of which 98% is the Health Administration.
Okay. And who is the the company that issues those cards? Who's the vendor for that?
That's U.S. Bank.
U.S. Bank. All right. All right. I'll yield back to my next round of questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Huelskamp, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And after 8 weeks since the memo was sent that indicated that there was a mockery of spending rules, I guess I'm still stunned that Mr. Murray was unaware of the memo till this morning. But Mr. Dole, you've been here and haven't had the great opportunity to answer many questions. When were you aware of the memo from Mr. Fry?
This morning. When
This
I read
morning.
it in the news clips, yes, sir.
And your position at the VA is what
I
again?
am the Chief Procurement and Logistics Officer for VHA.
Don't you think you should have seen this memo that had allegations of $6 billion in improper spending, most of it directly beneath your purview? Don't you think you should have heard about this before today?
It was shocking that the memo, even the existence of it, but yes, but I imagine I've heard issues that were brought up in the memo before.
Do you have authority over VHA contracting officers assigned to procure prosthetics?
Yes, I do.
In the memo, Mr. Fry alleges that you claim to have no such authority. So is that incorrect in the memo?
Well, a little bit of history, sir. It's really a split. 3 years ago, we came before some subcommittees, I believe this one, on what we called the prosthetics transfer at the time. For whatever reason, in VA, years ago, people who were not contracting officers had contracting officer warrants. We started that process to take the warrants back from all the people in pharmacy, logistics, sterile processing, and prosthetics. That was a deliberate process, and we were very deliberate about it because we did not want to hurt veterans. At the end of this process, it's a quality of life issue for an individual veteran. We wanted to make sure we did not impact that. We finished that process in October of 2013. Since that point, every procurement above $3,000 in prosthetics is bought by a warranted contracting officer. Now, I say that's only, although that's still close to 100,000 actions per year, that's still only 3% of the overall prosthetic actions. Less than $3,000, they're bought by the procurement folks who work under the purview of the medical center directors.
And I've got concerns about under 3,000. I have concerns about over. One thing I'm not clear of, I understand a $3,000 threshold, but what is the cap per card? What is the maximum that can be charged to each card?
It varies. It depends on what limits that are asked for and approved for that individual. There's a $3,000 cap for an individual procurement. Usually it doesn't even have to be up to $3,000, but then there are, I think, monthly limits on how much can be procured in total for that individual.
What's the maximum allowed on any card? Maybe Mr. Murray has that answer.
Whatever the contracting limit of the contract.
Well, if it's a contracting officer who has the card, it's the limit of that contracting officer's warrant. If it's below,
What is that limit?
well, it can vary by the contracting officer.
What's the highest limit?
Well, the highest is for contracting officers an unlimited warrant.
Unlimited? There's
Unlimited, yes, sir.
Okay. I had seen some figures somewhere about 150,000, but it's unlimited.
Well, some contracting officers have a warrant that's limited to 150,000, and some might be $1 million. It varies depending on the,
And maybe Mr. Murray could, we have 25,500 cards. Is that active?
That's correct.
And do you know the cumulative limit of those cards?
I'd have to get back with you with that number.
Okay. And that number, that limit, if there's a limit, is that a monthly limit, or is that a cap for a year, or?
There's both single purchase limits, which means per transaction, as well as monthly totals that are allowed.
And the variance in totals, that was for the monthly or the single purchase, single transaction?
well, in the normal course of events, an individual will have a card that authorizes them up to $3,000. If an approving official decides that person does not need that $3,000, that cap could be set at some lower dollar value.
Well, I'm worried about the $150,000 or the unlimited, which is no cap whatsoever, which seems to be a problem here. And let me ask Ms. Holliday a question on split purchasing. Do you have any evidence that VA employees engaged in split purchasing transactions on their cards to steer contracts to favored vendors?
If they're splitting purchase orders and they're trying to stay below the threshold based on their authority, that to me isn't to steer to somebody. They're just making those purchases. Now, do they have a favored vendor, like the chairman said? Possibly. They are circumventing federal competition requirements.
And Mr. Doyle, are you aware of that occurring, and how do you, what have you done to stop that?
Well, unfortunately, split requirements do happen. I don't know if they go to their favorite contractor to benefit. You know, the vast majority of unauthorized commitments, I'm convinced, because I saw the ratification actions in VHA, are for a bona fide need for that facility.
Well, it's not a bona fide need. It's being engaged in favoritism in the purchase. We're not saying that the needs aren't, that's another question, but it's splitting purchase so you can avoid that cap, that threshold, and so is that occurring, and what have you done to stop it?
I don't have a specific knowledge of it occurring. It may be some of them get steered to the
Could be in the memo, that could be in dozens of memos you've never seen. I presume since this has occurred, you've sent an email or contact the Secretary's office to ask him why he didn't see the memo. Have you tried to contact them?
I would not contact the Secretary's office directly. I would go through my chain of command in VHA.
Yeah, well,
Right.
better hurry. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.